coming from the dirty south. Yeah, I got the energy, something you know nothing about. When I break a mind, they be thinking I'm a lunatic. Standing in a dark room, dusting off a broomstick. Still coming cold with the blades like top flow. Running for a bankroll, spinning ghetto gospel. Deal with this pressure from the maybe it's my marvel. Stepping to me wrong, then you know I move a hostile. Stepping to me wrong, then you know I move a hostile.
Order. Order. Lewis Atkinson to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 722903 relating to the Online Safety Act. Mr Pritchard, it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair this afternoon and open this important debate as a member of the Petitions Committee. I want to start by thanking the 550,138 people who signed this petition for their engagement with the democratic process, and in particular the petition creator Alex Bainham, who I had the pleasure of meeting as part of my preparations for this debate and who is in the gallery today. My role as a member of the Petitions Committee is to introduce the petition and key contours of the issues and considerations that it touches on, hopefully to help ensure we have a productive debate this afternoon that enhances our understanding. I believe that at the heart of any balanced discussion on this issue is a recognition of two simultaneous features of the online world's development over the last 30 years. First, that there has been the development of incredible opportunities for people to communicate and form bonds together online that go far beyond the previous limitations of geography, and that have allowed for a huge multiplication of the opportunity for such interactions that we should welcome in a free society. Opportunities from marketplaces to gaming to dating. But secondly, that the opportunities for harm, hate and illegality have also hugely increased in a way that previous legislation and regulation was totally unequipped to deal with. That was what prompted the introduction of the Online Safety Act. As the Minister at the time said, this bill is world leading, and the legislative framework established by it will lead to the creation of a profoundly safer online environment in this country. It will kickstart change where that is sorely needed, and ensure that our children are better protected against pornography and other content that is harmful to them. While some aspects of the Online Safety Act have been more prominent than others since its introduction, it is important to recall for this debate that there are multiple parts to the Act, and each of these could separately be subject to amendment or indeed repeal by Parliament. There was the introduction of a framework placing obligations on in-scope services, for example social media platforms, to implement systems and processes to reduce the risk of their services being used for illegal activity, including terrorism offences, child sexual exploitation and abuse, drugs and weapon offences. Those duties have been implemented and in force since March 2025. Secondly, the Act required services to implement systems and processes to protect under 18s from age-inappropriate content, both content that may be passed from user to user and content that is published by the service itself, for example, pornography sites. We should recognise that the Online Safety Act implemented measures to regulate a wide range of diverse services, from social media giants to commercial sites, but also online spaces run by charities, community and voluntary groups, and individuals. As the first substantive attempt at regulating safety online, the OSA has brought into regulation many services that have not previously been regulated. And it is those services that the petition creator, Mr. Bainham, particularly explained to me that his primary motivation lay in creating this petition. He was spurred by concerns about the impact of the Online Safety Act on online hobby and community forums of the type of which he uses. These are online spaces created by unpaid, ordinary people in their spare time, focused on the discussion of particular shared interests, be they games, a film or TV series, or football teams. And a number of the administrators of such forums have expressed concern that they now face liabilities and obligations under the Online Safety Act that they are not equipped to meet. Mr. Pritchard, I must declare an interest at this stage. For over a decade, I have myself regularly used the ready-to-go RTG Sunderland AFC fans messaging boards. They provide thousands of Macams with online space to discuss the many ups and downs of our football club and associated issues facing the city, with current topics including club finances, match of the day tonight, and following the successful Tyne derby yesterday, the MAG meltdown thread. I heard directly from the administrator of RTG Forum in preparation for this debate, and he told me that he came close himself to shutting the site down when the Online Safety Act came into being, and he hasn't still totally ruled that out completely. He points out that there have been thousands of pages of guidance issued by Ofcom on the implementation of the Act, and that while tech companies with large compliance teams have the capacity to process that volume of guidance, having volunteers to do the same is a huge challenge. Ofcom have stressed that they will implement the Act in a way that is risk-based and proportionate, and have offered a digital toolkit targeted at small services in response. But the rules, even for the smaller sites, seem to require, for example, a separate and documented complaints system beyond the usual reporting functionality that small forums have often had in place. And it's been described to me that the administration of this is itself time-consuming and liable to being weaponised by trolls. Some forum hosts feel that uncertainty regarding the liability they face under the Online Safety Act is too much. The reassurance offered that prosecution is unlikely has not given sufficient confidence to some who have been running community sites as volunteers. To some, the risk of liability, of personal financial loss, or simply getting it wrong has been too great. And when the provisions of the Act came into force, a reported 300 small forums reportedly exited the online space or lost their status as independent forums and migrated to larger platforms such as Facebook. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making an extremely passionate and informed speech. The unintended consequences of the Online Safety Act on these small forums and specialist groups he's highlighting is absolutely critical. However, would he agree with me that there needs to be a balance struck where underage children are protected from harmful content, whatever forum or website that they are exposed to?
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman, and he won't be surprised that I will be coming on in my speech to deal with some wider issues about the Online Safety Act, in particular the protection of children. I think the debate is more like that we're likely to have today is likely to be more nuanced than a simple repeal or maintain the Online Safety Act, and talk about the implementation and the potential evolution of the Act over time. The ask that I've heard from administrators of small forums is that Ofcom take further steps to simplify the record-keeping and risk assessment burdens for small sites. When I've met with other organisations such as the Open Rights Group in preparation for this debate, they've suggested that exemptions be made for small and low-risk sites. It's clear that a size-only exemption would not be appropriate. For example, unfortunately, there have been small platforms specifically to host harmful content, such as forums dedicated to idealising suicide or self-harm. But it's possible that some combination of size and risk could be considered together. These questions, I think, touch at the heart of how we maintain the positives that come from vibrant and plural internet spaces, while also clamping down on online harms.
On that issue, will you give way?
I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and like him, I really want to pay tribute to site managers and moderators. I'm very sad indeed that an incredible example of that function, Maggie Lewis, from my own city of Oxford, very sadly passed away. She was an incredible presence online for the community and did much other community and charity work. But does he agree with me that it is important when looking at the regulatory burden that we really argue on the basis of facts? I looked at some of the small websites that apparently had issues because of the Act. I found one which was an internet forum known for its open discussion and encouragement of suicide and suicide methods. I found another that had allegedly shut down. Actually, that community website is still functioning, still has a forum so that local people can let others know what's happening in the community. It's just one element of it that's had to close. So does he agree we have to argue on the basis of facts here to make the right decision? Thank you.
I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. And I think clearly some of those forums, like the ones she reports, I think we would want a society for them to close down, that they have been harmful. But clearly I do recognise that there have been others that perhaps maybe preemptively took a decision to shut down. I think it's interesting, and I'm not sure whether the Minister's got further information about this, how far those numbers of reported close downs were done as a one-off, was that a one-off number in preemption rather than an ongoing repeated loss of online spaces. So, as I've outlined, Mr. Pritchard, I think what we're getting at is a more nuanced position from owners and operators of bona fide, genuine community forums, which are concerned about how to ensure that they are meeting their obligations in the same way that any person would meet obligations, for example, under the Data Protection Act. And that has always applied. It's a much more nuanced position, far from full-out repeal of the OSA, but more how can the obligations of the OSA be carried out in a proportionate manner. I will.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing this issue forward. And also, as somebody who shares a house with a Newcastle fan, can I thank him for a miserable weekend? It's very important that we get the safety elements and aspects of this correct, but would he agree with me that the Act shouldn't be used as a blunt tool to stifle freedom of speech online?
Yes, I would, but I will come to some of the issues, I think, regarding social media platforms, etc., in what I'm about to say. And I certainly wouldn't want to stifle the freedom of speech of Newcastle fans expressing their genuine, heartfelt sorrow about the events of yesterday. But I do want to turn now, Mr. Pritchard, to wider concerns expressed about the Online Safety Act, which, while not the motivations of the petition creator, would undoubtedly be held by a number of people signing these petitions. The number of signatories of this petition notably increased in the immediate aftermath of the implementation of age verification requirements being applied to significant parts of the internet, from pornography to some elements of social media. Here, I'm afraid, I find it significantly harder to provide balance in this debate in my introduction, having read the Children's Commissioner report published in advance of the implementation of the OSA, which found it's normal for children and young people to be exposed to online pornography, with 70% of children surveyed responding having seen pornography online. The same report found that children are being exposed at a very young age. The average age a child first saw pornography online was 13, but more than a quarter of respondents had seen online pornography by the age of 11. I will.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and he's making a very clear and coherent speech on this issue. I surveyed 1,000 young people in my constituency of Darlington, and the forum leads for my online safety forum said that they had found graphic and disturbing content that they had never searched for, regularly fed to them through the algorithms. Do you agree that this is robbing children of their childhood, and age verification needs to be stronger, not weaker, as a result of this Act?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I agree there is significant work to be done to effectively implement the Act, and we'll put into that, and I'm sure the Minister may wish to say that, some of that as well in his response. I think crucially the Children's Commissioner report found that children were most likely to see pornography by accident, and that is an absolutely key point that some of the criticism of the Act fails to grasp. Because the horrifying statistics that show the scale of online harm to children that the OSA is working to reduce make it clear that make it, I think, very obvious that why 69% of the public surveyed recently backed the introduction of age verification checks on platforms, and why children's charities and rights organisations overwhelmingly back the OSA, and, to my honourable friend's point, want to see it implemented more rapidly and robustly. Some petition signatories I've heard were particularly concerned about age verifications on platforms that go beyond those specifically designed as pornography sites, for example X, Reddit or Discord. But that speaks to that point that the Children's Commission shows that more than 8 out of 10 of the main sources where children saw pornography were not on porn sites. They were on social media or networking sites. So if those platforms choose to allow their users to upload pornographic content, and some don't, then platforms that do, in my view, rightly should be subject to the same age verification requirements of porn sites to keep our children safe. Following the implementation of the Online Safety Act, these provisions, it was reported that UK traffic to the most popular pornographic websites was notably down. Yes, there was an initial reported spike of downloads of VPNs for access, but it seems like increasingly likely from research that they were from adults worried about their anonymity rather than children seeking to circumvent the limitations. I think it's important that we reflect that the Online Safety Act is dealing with harms beyond porn as well. Content that is especially harmful to children that children should not have access to, including very violent content, content encouraging limited eating or suicide. I will.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and I think that's actually a really important part of the Online Safety Act is to look at those algorithms. In fact, when I was a county councillor looking at public health, I did a piece of work on disordered eating, and I was bombarded with content. Actually, I'm not a vulnerable young person, and I'm not a vulnerable adult. My real fear is that information gets seen by people who are not as capable of managing that content. Would a member agree that the algorithm work is a key part of the Online Safety Bill?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right, and that's why, as I understand it, the proactive duty the Act places on providers to ensure the nature of their algorithms and their content is crucially important on the type of content that usually refers. So it's right that the largest providers and those most frequently used by kids have to take active responsibility to take those children safe. It's the OSA ultimately, and the implementation of it, that means that algorithms serving harmful content to kids is now being regulated for the first time. Now, there's a long way to go, and I'm sure other members will want to say more than I can in this introduction, but I want to be clear to my constituents that I support the action the OSA is prompting to improve children's safety and welfare online. We've got various surveys to hand about the impact of it, and I know Ofcom are publishing their own research, and a formal government review will follow in due course. But most impactful for me was seeing a teenage boy report on a news piece about this recently, that now when I'm scrolling TikTok, it's free of violence. And that's what's changed in the months following the implementation of the Online Safety Act. So it's no wonder that organisations such as the Online Safety Act Network, who I spoke to in preparation for this debate as well, fully support the Act's principles and point to early evidence that the legislation is actively reducing harm to children. They emphasise the need for Ofcom to move beyond content filters and towards safety by design, addressing features that incentivise pylons that target an individual with abuse and harassment in addition, for example. So the new Ofcom research itself shows that 8% of parents now believe that measures in the Code of Practice are beginning to improve the safety of children online. So my personal belief is that we should not be considering whether to repeal it, but how we can continue to enforce it in a robust, effective and proportionate manner. I want to turn, before I close, Mr Pritchard, I wanted to touch briefly on online hate, an area which the Online Safety Act speaks to that has perhaps not had as much focus so far as it might have. As well as being a member of the Petitions Committee, it's a privilege to be a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, and we currently have an inquiry about combating new forms of extremism. It's very clear from the public evidence that we have received so far that left unregulated and unchallenged, online spaces and services can be used to amplify hate and thus risk increasing risks of extremist action, including violence. Analysis by the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust, for example, highlights that there are patterns of coordinated and persistent misogynistic, anti-immigrant, anti-government and anti-Semitic discourse on social media, with repeated bot accounts used to amplify misleading or harmful narratives that fuel hate and that may increase the risk of violence. Such content often breaches platforms' own terms of service, but now, under the Online Safety Act, I understand that Ofcom Category 1 services will be mandated to proactively offer users optional tools to help them reduce the likelihood that they will encounter legal but harmful content like that. Of course, there's much to be done to implement those provisions in an appropriate manner, but I would invite anyone calling for the full repeal of the Act to consider that how as we as a society deal with the rise of extremism and the context where the internet can be used as a sort of free-for-all fuelled by hate-filled algorithms that thrive and that incentivise division and hate rather than consensus and civic peace. So, Mr Pritchard, I am aware in closing that there are large parts of the Online Safety Act that I have not been able to touch on today, and I hope other members will over the course of the debate. There's questions about end-to-end encryption, cyber flashing, the creation of abusive deepfakes, AI moderation and chatbots. Yes, of course.
Thank you. So the Honourable Member is making a strong and thoughtful case. Does he agree that while the Act regulates user-to-user services, it leaves a significant gap around generative AI chatbots, despite growing evidence of harm to children, to private interaction? And does he also share my concerns at the speed at which this technology is developing risks outpacing the legislative framework we currently have in place?
I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention. I do agree. I think my understanding is that when this legislation was drafted, the astonishing pace at which AI has developed in recent years was not fully available for the drafters of this legislation initially. And I would ask the Minister to reflect perhaps on that point as he addresses the implementation of the Act and potential future evolution of it through primary legislation. Yes, of course.
Thank the Honourable Member who's giving way for giving way and being so generous with his time. May I also ask that he passes on to the Minister that there is a possibility to brand bots going forward and to require the Online Safety Act to be amended to make sure that anybody or any profile that is a bot, so is generated by AI, is actually explicitly marketed as so, which would protect users going forward as AI advances.
The Honourable Lady makes that point well, and I know the Minister will have heard her do so. So I would just conclude by saying, as this discussion continues, I hope we can find a way of reflecting those two areas of balance, those two features of the online world now in this debate. First of all, the absolute primacy of safeguarding children and tackling serious online harms, but also recognising the real benefits that living in a connected, increasingly connected society bring to us all. They are very much, I think, the motivations of the petition creator. You know, the work that is done by good civic-minded folk and creators and administrators of online communities and hobby forums across the country. And I do think, as naturally the learning about the implementation of this continues, there is a way of doing that in a way that supports the efforts of those people without risking such sites being used to further online harms. I think it's fair to say that the consensus that I've seen, Mr Pritchard, is that reform rather than repeal is the realistic route forward, and that's natural on a groundbreaking legislation such as this. But that reform must be sensitive to the scale, proportionality and privacy, as well as the emerging and changing nature of online harms. So with that, Mr Pritchard, I thank you members for their time and their interventions, and I look forward to a positive debate.
Can I just remind colleagues, if they do wish to speak, if they can bob? I think quite a few are bobbing, so thank you for that. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 722903 relating to the Online Safety Act. Anne Davis.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Pritchard. The Online Safety Act certainly has its weaknesses, but I do not believe it should be abolished. This law has made progress in protecting children online. Scrapping it would throw them right back into well-known harms. Today, I will briefly focus on one area where this Act is not adequate, and that is AI chatbots. AI chatbots have developed rapidly in recent years, and they are becoming ingrained in our children's lives. And let me give you just a few figures. 1 in 4 children between the ages of 13 and 17 in England and Wales have turned to AI chatbots for mental health support. Vulnerable children at even more risk. 26% of vulnerable children say they would rather talk to an AI chatbot than to a real person. And 23% said they use chatbots because they don't have anyone else to talk to. Children don't have anyone else to talk to, and this is the society. This is the society that we're creating. Of course.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. The government recently launched last week our youth strategy, which is the first youth strategy in over 2 decades, and it was on the back of stark research that found that 1 in 4 children growing up today do not have a trusted adult that they could reach out to. Does the Honourable Lady agree with me that the use of functioning AI could be put to good use for the NHS to support with signposting and making sure that children can get to the charities that are doing great work to support them, rather than giving them algorithmic-based advice?
The algorithms are a disaster, I think, personally, within the system. In Wales, of course, it's very different to in England, so I have to be careful that I'm not treading on the toes of the Senedd here, because they do excellent work in youth work, in fairness. And in Caerfyrddin, in my constituency, we have a number of youth projects which are doing really well. Dr M's is one in Carmarthen, which services over 500 children every week coming through their doors. But surely a person-to-person conversation is so much better than going online and looking for something there, because you do not know what's coming through that chatbot to you. And this is my main concern, if I'm honest. This is the scale of the issue that we're facing. And while I appreciate that a multifaceted approach is crucial to ensure that our children are safe and thriving, we cannot afford to get this one wrong. Both Ofcom and the Secretary of State have acknowledged that AI chatbots fall mostly outside the Online Safety Act scope. And of course I welcome the announcement from the Secretary of State, and the government is exploring tougher regulation on AI chatbots, and I've asked Ofcom to clarify expectations for any covered by the Act, alongside a public information campaign that's coming next year. But I am concerned that we're not moving at the pace or the sense of urgency needed to get a real handle on this issue. So I ask if the Minister can share more specific details about their plans and a timeline to implement tougher regulation of AI chatbots. Online safety for children is a priority for all of us, and I hope that members across the House can agree that this is a shared goal that mustn't be politicised.
Jim,
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. The new media has quickly become the worst of the old media, owned, controlled and directed by the wealthy and the powerful. And my focus in particular today is going to be on social media, because it's no longer a movement of the people, nor has it been built and designed for public good. It had the potential to be, but it's been deliberately designed not to be, and we're now paying the price, with real harm, hate, division, exploitation and extremism now normalised. I hear the petitioners' concerns about the impact on community forums, but the truth is that the online regulation does not go anywhere near far enough, and the reason for that is because the previous government failed to take the action that was needed. For instance, there is no fit and proper persons test, well there should be. There is no editorial responsibility for content on the platforms, there should be. There is no adequate protection from malign foreign influence, there should be. There are no protection against disinformation, there should be. There's no meaningful safeguards against racism, misogyny or hate, there should be. There are no restrictions on members of parliament monetising content they produce and instead posting solely for the public interest, rather than generating income into their bank accounts. Well, there should be. And there's no transparency on algorithms, nor the need to declare in-kind benefit in politics in the way that there is in almost every other aspect of political game. Well, again, there should be. Because as it stands, truth, democracy and the safeguarding of the public interest is under threat. The previous government ducked it, offering a watered-down version backed up by a toothless regulator. We've seen what is possible when red lines are drawn. Australia has decided that the welfare of its children are more important than the interests of the powerful and the wealthy. Now that is leadership. The UK's failure to stand up to the powerful vested interests has played right into the hands of foreign forces who wish our country, our way of life and our democracy harm. Technology is moving fast. We see that with AI, and lawmakers, quite frankly, need to be much sharper and much quicker to keep up. Because the first duty of any government is to protect the national security of its citizens. And so for the government, the question is simply this: when does it start to fight on this new front with vigour and to finally do what the previous government failed to do?
Well, Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. It's a pleasure to speak with you in the chair. And I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Sunderland Central, for his powerful and eloquent speech introducing this important debate. The scale of this petition, with over 500,000 people calling for the repeal of the Online Safety Act, should make us reflect. Not because online safety itself is unpopular, but because many people believe this legislation is not yet striking the right balance. Let me be clear, the Online Safety Act exists for a reason, and I stand in strong support with its intent, its aims and its objectives, and I would not agree with it being repealed. For too long, online platforms have failed to protect users, particularly children, from serious harm. The statistics are sobering. Nearly 1 in 5 children aged 10 to 15 has exchanged messages with someone they have never met. Over 9,000 reported child sexual abuse offences in 22 and 2023 involved an online element. And in recent years, we have seen tragic cases where exposure to harmful online content has contributed to devastating outcomes. Repealing the Act would leave us with very little in the way of meaningful protection. It remains a central piece of legislation regulating online spaces in the UK. That is a hard pill to swallow, but a necessary truth we must accept. However, supporting the Act does not mean ignoring where it needs important improvements. One of the most significant concerns raised is age restriction. Age gating can and should play a role in protecting children from genuinely harmful content. But what is becoming increasingly clear is that the boundaries of age restrictions are not defined well. There is growing evidence that lawful political content, including news and commentary on conflicts such as Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, is being placed behind age gates. Teenagers aged 16 and 17 are finding themselves blocked from accessing political information and current affairs, sometimes more strictly than the content regulated by the BBFC in film and television. That should give us pause, particularly at a time when this House is considering extending the vote to 16-year-olds. If we believe young people should be active participants in our democracy, we cannot also allow systems that restrict their access to political debate by default, just because these are difficult and sensitive topics. What is and is not age restricted needs to be far clearer, more consistent and more proportionate. The second area where clarity is urgently needed is generative AI. At the same time as we are having this debate, the Home Secretary was making a statement on the violence against women and girls. She has rightly described violence against women and girls as a national emergency, and the government's 5-year national strategy acknowledges the growing threat posed by intimate deepfakes, with one NSPC survey showing that 3 in 5 people fear becoming a victim, and with current laws proving too difficult to apply in complex and rapidly evolving cases, I would ask the Minister what specific legislative proposals this government is hoping to develop to address deepfake abuse. The second area which I've mentioned is generative AI. When this legislation was drafted and passed, the pace of AI development was very different. Today, AI tools and chatbots are embedded across social media, search engines and messaging platforms, with people relying on ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot as search engines, and virtual assistants embedded into almost every online service we use. They can generate harmful and misleading content within seconds, including advice related to self-harm, eating disorders, substance misuse, and suicide assistance. Only last week, I led a debate here in Westminster Hall on the need for stronger AI regulation. That debate reinforced a growing concern that many AI-driven services currently sit at the edges of the Online Safety Act. While Ofcom has acknowledged this gap and issued guidance, guidance alone is not enough. We need clarity on how generative AI is regulated and whether further legislative action is required to keep pace with the technology. Mr. Pritchard, the message from this petition is not a rejection of online safety. It is a call for a system that protects children while also safeguarding freedom of expression, political engagement, and public trust. The challenge before us is not to repeal, but refinement, strengthening definitions, clarifying age restrictions, and ensuring the Online Safety Act evolves alongside emerging technologies. If we get that right, we can protect users online without undermining the democratic values we try to defend. Thank you.
Lizzie College.
Mr. Pritchard, it's a pleasure to serve here today under your chairship. It's been very interesting to hear from my honourable friend for Sunderland Central about the experience of smaller hobby sites and their concerns about the Online Safety Act, and I'm sure that Ofcom and the government will listen to these. The Online Safety Act, though, is not about controlling speech. It's not about the government deciding what adults think or read or say online, but it is about responsibility, and more specifically about whether we're prepared to say that the online world should have the same safety features as the offline world, whether we expect the online world to be a Wild West or not. And I have to say, a lot of the opposition to the Online Safety Act has centred on the freedoms of adults, and I appreciate that that is important. Adults must be free to build their online lives as they see fit, but fundamentally I think that this doesn't trump the rights of children to be safe, whether online or offline, and rights are always a matter of balance. And I think before I go further, Mr. Pritchard, it's worth being clear about what the Act actually does. It essentially requires online services to assess the risk of harm on their platforms and put proportionate systems in place to reduce those risks. That includes harm from illegal content, such as child sexual abuse material, and harm when children are able to access content like pornography or material that promotes suicide or self-harm. And alongside that, the Act does contain proactive requirements to protect freedom of expression. And the largest platforms are now legally required to continually assess how their decisions affect users' ability to speak freely online. And that obligation is explicit and it's enforceable. And in many ways, the principles behind this Act are not new. Technology companies have moderated speech and removed content from their platforms since the very beginning. But the difference is, until now, those decisions were driven by opaque corporate priorities, not by a clear and accountable framework of public harm. And the stakes here are high. These are some of the first young people for whom their entire life has been permeated by the online world. It shapes their values, their relationships, and their mental health. For many children, when it comes to sex, self-harm, body image, the first place they turn isn't a parent, it isn't a teacher, and it isn't a GP. It's the internet. I want to talk today about pornography. I think we all accept without controversy that children should not be able to access pornography offline. An adult entertainment shop doesn't let a 12-year-old walk in and buy a dirty video with their pocket money. But when it comes to internet pornography, we have allowed, as a society, children to freely access material that they are simply not mature enough to deal with. And, Mr. Pritchard, pornography is more violent than ever before, more dangerous than ever before. And despite this, it's not been easier for children to access it. The door to the store has been wide open for too long. And according to a 2023 report by the UK's Children Commissioner, before the Online Safety Act came into force, the vast majority of children surveyed said they had seen pornography online by accident through websites like X, formerly known as Twitter. Kids aren't even needing to seek it out. It was being fed to them. And when they did seek it out, dedicated sites didn't put up any barriers. The previous requirements for websites like Pornhub were simply being able to enter your date of birth. This made the sole access requirement the ability to subtract 18 from the current year. And I think we all know that's not good enough. This matters because online pornography isn't passive. It teaches, it shapes how children understand sex, intimacy, power, consent. It sets expectations long before young people have the tools to question or contextualise what they're seeing. And according to that same report by the Children's Commissioner, more than half of respondents said they had seen pornography involving strangulation. 44% reported seeing depictions of rape, much of which involved people who were apparently asleep. And this content doesn't stay on screen, it spills into real life. The Children's Commissioner research showed that frequent exposure to violent sexual material is associated with a higher tolerance of sexual aggression, distorted ideas about consent, and increased likelihood of sexually aggressive behaviour. Almost half of young girls surveyed expected sex to involve physical aggression. What children learn online doesn't disappear when the browser closes. And with the Online Safety Act, for the first time, adult content online is being age restricted in the same way it is offline, and sites must now use effective age verification tools. This includes third-party services, which should use privacy-preserving techniques to confirm a user's data without sharing personal information with the platform itself. Since the new laws came into effect, Ofcom have been monitoring compliance, and many of the most visited pornography sites have introduced highly effective age checks. And I'll be honest, Chair, I really don't have a lot of sympathy for pornography users who object to having their age verified. If they are bothered about their privacy, just don't use it. Pornography is not a human right. You can choose not to use it. And pornography is not the only harm that this Act addresses. For years, platforms like Twitter, Tumblr, TikTok have hosted vast amounts of content related to self-harm and suicide. Some of it framed as support, much of it not. Posts and forums provide copious instructions on how to self-harm, the implements to use, how best to hide it, and where to cut to do the most damage to yourself without killing yourself. Some children access this content entirely by accident, before they even know what self-harm is. Others have found these sites when they're already struggling, and they are pulled deeper into it by algorithms that reward repetition and intensity. The content they're seeing not only risks normalising those behaviours, it risks glamorising it too. And I just think so many adults have no idea what is out there. Because they aren't fed it on their own feeds, they don't understand the danger and the extremism of what's out there. And investigations have shown that teenage accounts engaging with suicide, self-harm or depression content were then flooded with more of the same. A single click could trigger what one report from the Molly Rose Foundation described as a tsunami of harmful material. Now, I'm not saying we should shut down places that offer support to young people who have urges to self-harm, but we need to make sure young people can access evidence-based support and not be exposed to content that could encourage harm. And that's why organisations like the Samaritans have praised the Online Safety Act. Under the Act, platforms that recommend or promote content to users, for example, on For You feeds on TikTok, must ensure that those systems don't push harmful content to children. And not only does this put the onus on platforms to prevent children from seeing such content, but if children do come across it or search for that harmful content, the platform should avoid showing children more of the same, avoid them going down a very harmful rabbit hole. Now, clearly it's still early days. The legislation includes a formal review with a report to Parliament due within a few years of full implementation. We will and should look closely at what is working and what needs to be improved. As lawmakers, we do have that responsibility. But the early signs are encouraging. Sky News spoke to 6 teenagers before and after the new rules came into force. 5 of them said they were seeing much less harmful content in their feeds. Now, I know this is anecdata, but it is important to listen to the experiences of young people. Ofcom has already opened investigations and benefits have already come from that. For example, file sharing services that were being used to distribute child sex abuse material have now installed automated technology to detect and remove such material following an investigation by Ofcom. And proportionality is at the heart of it. Ofcom has developed guidance to support compliance, and I understand the concerns about smaller or volunteer-run forums. But some of the most harmful content appears on very small or obscure sites, so to simply take out smaller sites, I think, would do a disservice. And I'm sure there will be problems to be worked out, and we should continue to explore how best to provide children with age-appropriate experiences online and think about how to get age verification right. But whilst we refine and improve this system, we can't ignore the reality that serious harms have been happening, and we have a responsibility to tackle this. And for the first time, the UK has a regulatory framework that forces tech companies to assess risk, protect freedom of expression, and give the public far greater transparency about how decisions are made about online content. I'll close, Mr. Pritchard, with a final thought. Other countries have banned young people from social media. I've been thinking about this a lot, and currently I actually don't think that's the right thing to do. Online communities can provide friendship and solace to young people, particularly those marginalised, perhaps due to their sexual orientation, or restricted in life, perhaps those kept at home by ill health or disabilities. Online communities can offer a lot to our young children, but children have a right to be just that, children, to not have to deal with the complexities and hardships of adult life. So we as adults must do what we can to build safe online spaces for them, just as we do physical ones. Thank you.
Collins.
And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. At its birth, the internet was envisaged as a great advancement in free society. Decentralised, crowdsourced and open, it would share knowledge across humanity. As it grew, every one of us would own a platform and our voice. Of course, since then, bandwidth has increased massively, which means that now we experience a rich variety of media. Storage and compute have increased many orders of magnitude, which have created the power of big data, and generative capabilities have emerged quite recently, creating a whole new virtual world. Services no longer simply route us to what we were searching for, but offer us a personalised menus of rich media, some from human sources, and some generated to entertain or meet demands. And we're now just starting to recognise the alarming trends that we're discussing today, that rich media and content has become increasingly harmful, that compute, storage and big data power is being used to collect, predict and influence our most private values, preferences and behaviours. Generative AI is immersing us in a world of reconstituted news, custom facts and bots posing as people. It increasingly feels like a platform now owns every one of us and our voice. Harms are dangerously impacting our young people. I'll read some research from the Centre for Countering Digital Hate that illustrates some of the problems. On YouTube, the next video algorithm was found recommending eating disorder content to a UK-based 13-year-old female account. In just a few minutes, the account was exposed to material promoting anorexia and weight loss. And over half of the further recommended videos were for eating disorders or weight loss content. On TikTok, new accounts for teens were found recommending self-harm and eating disorder content within minutes of scrolling the For You feed. Suicide content appeared within 2.5 minutes and eating disorder content within 8. Accounts created with phrases like lose weight received 3 times as many of these videos as standard teen accounts, and 12 times as many self-harm videos. These are not isolated incidents. They show the scale and the speed at which harmful material can spiral into exponential immersion in worlds of danger for young people. On X, formerly known as Twitter, and a trigger warning for anybody who has been affected by the absolutely appalling Bonsai Beach Hanukkah attack. Following the Manchester synagogue attack, violent anti-Semitic messages celebrating and calling for further violence were posted and left live for at least a week. And ChatGPT has been shown to produce dangerous advice within minutes of account creation, including guidance on self-harm, restrictive diets, and substance misuse. I'm really grateful, actually, to my honourable friends for raising the topic of pornography. I've had the immense privilege to be at an event with a room full of men who spoke really openly and vulnerably about their experiences with pornography, how it affected their sex lives, their intimacy with their partners or wives, their dynamics of power and respect, and how it infused all of their relationships in daily life. They said things like, we want to see it, but we don't want to see it. And if adult men, and it would seem to me from this experience at least, perhaps the majority of adult men are finding it this hard to deal with, how can we begin to comprehend the impact it's having on our children who are falling across it accidentally? Mr. Pritchard, this can all feel too big to deal with, too big to tackle. It feels immense and almost impossible to comprehend and to address. And yet, to some, at the same time, the Online Safety Act feels like a sledgehammer cracking a nut. It is, in fact, I would say, a sledgehammer cracking a deeply poisonous pill. But that pill is in amongst a veritable chemistry lab of other psychoactive substances that it completely misses, and it will always be too slow and inaccurate to hit. We must do better. We must keep it, but we must do better. I'm an engineer, and I'm very aware that since the Industrial Revolution, when physical machines suddenly became immensely more powerful and complex, a whole world of not just regulations, but technical standards has been built. It infuses our daily lives, and you can barely touch an object in this room that hasn't been built and verified to some sort of standard, be it British, European, or a global ISO standard for safety. To me, this is a model that we should be ready to reflect in the digital world. A product can be safe or unsafe. We can validate it to be safe. We can design it to be safe. We can set criteria that let us prove it. We've shown that in our physical world since the Industrial Revolution. So how do we now begin to put away the big blunt instrument of regulation when the problem seems so big and insurmountable?
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend. The Ofcom officials came before the Speakers' Conference, of which I'm a member, so I declare that interest. And they spoke about Section 100 of the Act that gives Ofcom the powers to request certain types of information on how, for example, the recommender systems work on their algorithms. Unfortunately, they said this could be complicated and challenging to do. But one of the things that they spoke about very convincingly was that they want to require, in fact they can require, those companies to put information, particularly about the algorithms, in the public domain that will help researchers. And that could really help with the points that he's making about creating regulations that really can improve the safety for our population.
I thank my honourable friend for his remark, and he's entirely right. In my own experience as an engineer, where we were engineering products for safety, very critically for safety, it was absolutely incumbent upon us to be fully open with those regulating and certifying our products for approval to show them everything we'd done. We had numerous patents on our technology that was new and emerging and had immense potential and value, and yet we were open, utterly open with those notified bodies to ensure that our products were safe. Similarly, I was fortunate enough to be able to convene industry to share the key safety insights that we were discovering early on to make sure that no mistake was ever repeated and that the whole industry was able to innovate and develop in a safe way. So I really thank you for his comment, and I strongly agree. There is no excuse for a lack of openness when it comes to safety. So how do we move forward? I've put it that the first step is to start to break down the problem. And I found it helpful to describe it in 4 broad categories. Harms or hazards that apply to the individual simply through exposure. This would be content such as pornography, violence, images of or about abuse. And then hazards that would apply to an individual, but by virtue of their interaction. So this would be addictive user interfaces. It might be personified GPTs. And I'd just like to make a comment that we cannot begin to comprehend the potential harms that could come to human beings psychologically when we start to promote attachment with a machine. And there is no way we can have evidence to inform how safe or harmful that would be, but I would suggest that all the knowledge that probably exists in the psychological and psychiatric community would point to that being extremely risky and dangerous. And also recommendation algorithms, of course, that we've discussed at length. And then also harms that apply at a societal level that affect us collectively. So, for example, by exposure, these would be misinformation, or echo chambers of opinion, which have expanded now, not only to be echo chambers of opinion, but actually echo chambers of reality, where more and more people's worldview is being informed by what they see in these spaces that are actually highly customized to their existing bias. And we've never been in a situation... Oh, I will, thank you.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point. I've met constituents to understand their concerns and their ambitions for online safety legislation, and there's a clear need to balance the protection of vulnerable users against serious online harms with the need to protect lawful speech and to pragmatically review and implement the Act. On that point that he's making there about equipping particularly our younger people with the skills in order to scrutinise what's real and what's fake, would he agree with me that although we do have online safety within the national curriculum, we need to be supporting our teachers so that they can provide consistent teaching of children across schools up and down our country, so they have the critical skills, the critical thinking ability, in the same way that they might have around road safety or relationships or consent, but when it comes to online safety in particular?
Before I can I just ask everybody who has their phone to silent, please?
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. Yes, I thank my honourable friend for his comment, and I agree with him. In fact, I was fortunate enough to meet with Worcestershire Youth Cabinet, who are based in my constituency, and one of their main concerns was their online safety. And I was really struck by their comments to us, because we were ready for them to ask for more support in navigating the online world, and that is not what they asked for. They said, please don't try to support us anymore. Support our adults to support us. We have trusted adults, we have parents, we have teachers. We want to work with them to navigate this journey. Please help them so they can help us. So I thank him very much for that. It's an excellent point. I will.
He's making an excellent speech, and I think really getting to the heart of some of the tensions here. He does still seem to lean quite strongly into how the algorithms almost are self-learning, that they catch on to what people share organically and then double down on that as a way to commercialise the content. Does he accept, though, that there are some platforms that exist, some widely used platforms that exist, that aren't just using that algorithm, they are deliberately either suppressing mainstream opinion and fact in order to amplify false information and disinformation, and that the people who are benefiting are those who have maligned interest in our country?
Yeah, absolutely, I thank my honourable friend for that. He's right. All of these algorithms now have hidden interests, sometimes just to increase use, but sometimes these may stray into, I think we all strongly suspect, political agendas. It's remarkable, actually, how powerful this part of the online world really is. My personal view is that it's not dissimilar to the R number during COVID, in that if you see a diverse enough set of content, your worldview will have enough overlap with other people that it will tend to converge. And in the old days, the 6 o'clock news or the news on the radio provided us with shared content that made that all of us heard, whether we agreed or not, and it anchored us to a narrative that we all shared together. Now, increasingly, we're in these echo chambers of reality where we're getting information that pertains to be news, reactions that pertain to be from human beings in our communities, that reinforce certain views. And more and more and more, it's capable that our number becomes greater than one. And slowly our worldviews diverge further and further and further. And an experiment like this on a society has never been carried out before, but it strikes me as it could be extremely harmful. And while we're exploring this theme, I'd like to just point to the opposite potential. In Taiwan, when their digital minister took office, trust in government was at 9%. 9%. They carried out a project creating a digital platform that reversed the algorithm. So instead of prioritising content based on engagement, which is a good proxy for how polarising or divisive it is, they prioritise the algorithm for how strongly it resonated with both sides of the political divide. And the stronger a sentiment was bridging between those two extremes, the more it was prioritised. And so instead of people competing to become more and more extreme to play to their own audience, they competed to make sentiments and statements that were more and more bridging across the divide. In the end, as this matured, they were able to start to say things like, once a sentiment receives 85% agreement and approval, we, the government, will take it on as a goal. We'll work out how to get there, but we will take that as a goal from the public to say that we should be shooting for it. And by the end of that project, public trust in government was at 70%. These algorithms are powerful. They can be powerful for good, they can be powerful for ill. What we need to make sure is that they're actually safe for us as a society. And that should be the minimum standard. And finally, we can therefore imagine harms that apply on a societal level, but come through interaction. And that, I would say, is where we start to treat machines as if they are members of our society, people. When I first started exploring this, I thought that we hadn't seen this yet. And then I realised that we have. These are bots on social media, fake accounts, but we don't know that they're not human beings. They're not verified as human beings, and we can't help but start to believe and trust what we see. And it is only, I would say, a matter of time before these bots become more and more sophisticated and more agendered, more able to build relationships with us and to influence us even more deeply. This is a dangerous threshold, and it points to the need for us to deal with it in a sophisticated way. So what next? I think it's critical that, first of all, we start to develop tools. I mean, technically speaking, these are models that classify and quantify these hazards to individual people and to us as a society, so we can understand what is hazardous and what is not. And then, based on that, we can start to build tools and models that allow us to either validate products as safe, and they should, I agree, be safe by design, or to provide protective features. Already, some companies are developing protection algorithms that can detect content that is illegal or indeed hazardous in various different ways, and then provide a trigger to an operating system to, for example, mask that, make it blurred or opaque, either at the screen level or at the camera level. Rapidly, these tools are becoming more and more capable, but they're not being deployed. And at the moment, there's very little incentive for them to be deployed. If, for example, we were to standardise interfaces or sockets of some type in the software environment for these protective tools to be plugged in to operating systems or backends, then we could create a market to develop more and more accurate and capable software. In the world of physical safety, we use this principle called state-of-the-art. In contrast to how we might all understand that term, it doesn't mean the cutting edge of technology. The term state-of-the-art rather means safety features that are common enough that they should be adopted as standard, and we should expect to have them. A really good example of this, well, the automotive industry is a great example, and perhaps the easiest one for me to point to is anti-lock brakes. These started out as a real luxury feature in high-end vehicles, but as they became more and more affordable and accessible, they rolled onto more and more cars, and now they come as standard in all cars, and you would not be allowed to sell a car if it didn't have that in, because it doesn't meet the state of the art. If we were to apply a similar principle to online protection software, that means that tech companies with capable protections would have a guaranteed market, and that the digital product manufacturers or service providers would have to keep up, and that would drive both innovation but also uptake. These are already practices in industry. They cost the public purse nothing. They generate growth, high-value jobs, and national capabilities. Making the internet safe in the right way doesn't close it down. It creates freedoms and it opens it up. Freedom to trust what you're seeing, freedom to use it without being hurt, freedom to rely on it without endangering our national security. Another parallel, we wouldn't dream of building a balcony without a railing. If we had built one, we wouldn't decide that the only way to make it safe would be to declare that the balcony was only for use by adults. It still wouldn't be safe, adults and children alike would inevitably come to harm. And many of our regulations wouldn't allow it. In fact, the railing must reach a certain height, it must withstand certain forces, it must be designed with factors of safety, it must be maintained, we'd have an inspection to make sure it's safe. Someone designing or opening a building with an unprotected, unbarrier balcony could easily expect to go to prison. So we've all come to expect our built environment to be safe in that way, and having made it robustly safe for adults, it's also largely safe for children. If we build good standards and regulation, all of us can navigate the digital world safely and freely. Likewise, we need to build the institutions to ensure fast and dynamic enforcement. For services, there are precedents for good enforcement. We've seen great examples where, for example, sites haven't complied. TCP ports for the payment system have been turned off instantly. That's a really strong motivation for a website to comply. It's fast, it's dynamic, it's robust, and it's very quickly reversible. You can turn the TCP port back on, and they can once again accept payments. We need this kind of fast, dynamic enforcement if we're going to keep up with a fast and adaptive world working around us. And while I'm on institutions, I'd like to also point out, and I wouldn't be surprised if my honourable friend, the member for Rugby, expands on this. When television and radio came into existence, we built the BBC so that we would have a trusted source of some of these services. It kept us safe, but in the end it also ended up projecting our influence around the world. We need to once again build the institutions or expand them and the infrastructure to provide digital services in our collective interest. Oh, well.
He's making a very good debate. He should maybe consider a career in TED Talks after this. I think there have been a number of competitor platforms been tried. There's been Blue Sky as an alternative to Wex, but the take-up isn't sustained. And you do slightly wonder if the monopoly that some of these online platforms have now is just so well embedded that people have become out of habit, quite familiar and attached to them. And there is a tension, I think, with members in this House and we must all feel at times about whether we should or shouldn't be on some of these platforms or not. But the fact is that there is a need for mainstream voices to occupy these spaces to make sure that we don't concede to extremes of any political spectrum. But we are always going to be disadvantaged if the algorithm is driven towards those extremes and not to the mainstream. So I just kind of test the principle of an online BBC versus whether or not there should be a more level playing field for mainstream content on the existing platforms.
Yes, I thank you for his point. And of course, he's right. If we regulate for safety, then we don't need to worry about the ecosystem needing these good actors to displace it. But at the same time, these good actors would have a competitive and valuable role to play. And I don't want to undervalue the currency of trust. And institutions like the BBC are so robustly trustworthy that they have a very unique value to offer, even if we do manage to create a safe ecosystem and market of online services. So I'm convening a group of academics to start trying to build the models I discussed as the foundation for technical standards for safe digital products. I'd like to take the opportunity to invite the Minister to engage the department in this work. It's vital both for the safety of each of us and our children as individuals and for the security and the resilience of our society. And I'd also take this opportunity to invite anybody in that technical space of academia or industry exploring some of these models and tools to get in touch with me if they see this and they're interested. Only by taking assertive action across all levels of technical, regulatory and legal governance can we ensure the safety of citizens. Only by expanding our institutions can we provide meaningful enforcement of this, designing and building online products, tools and infrastructure. But if we do these things, the internet will be more open, more secure, more private, more valuable and more accessible to all of us. Good regulation, I would put it, is the key to a safe and open internet.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. It's a pleasure to serve under your chair. I wanted to just add some actual data to our debate today. We are inundated, often online or in our inboxes, about repealing the Online Safety Act. These are well-funded campaigns. There's also a lot of material online that is coming from very particular sources, not necessarily within the UK. But actually, 70% of people in the UK are supportive of the Online Safety Act, and a similar number are supportive of age verification. And much of that has to do with what our children are seeing online. Almost 80% of people 18 to 21 have seen sexual violence before the age of 18. 80%. That is a huge number of people whose initial sexual experiences or viewing of sex is ones of violence. So what does the Online Safety Act? It's putting porn back on the top shelf. It's not getting rid of it, it's putting it back on the top shelf. All of us are of an age where we knew the corner shop had on the top of the magazine rack, that's where the porn was, right? For our children, it is being fed to them in their feeds. Also, it's the type and nature of porn that people are seeing online. 80% of that porn has some kind of strangulation within it. That has real-world consequences, as we've seen from the latest data on women's health in terms of strokes. Strangulation is now the second leading cause of women having strokes in the UK. Now, this is really shocking, and this is why we need the Online Safety Act to intervene on what was being fed to us. 30% of people, young people in Milton Keynes have been approached by strangers since the implementation of the Online Safety Act. And the biggest place that they're being approached is roadblocks. Now, gaming platforms are not ones that we automatically identify as being those where you are approached by strangers. But what happens, what we know from police investigations, is they approach young children on roadblocks and then they move them on to an end-to-end encryption site where they can ask them to share images. In 2024, we saw 7,263 online grooming offences. And remember, those will just be the ones that are not in end-to-end encryption sites. There were 291,273 child sexual abuse material identified last year. Again, remember, this is not the material that's being shared on end-to-end encryption sites because we have no idea what's actually being shared. 90% of that is self-generated. That is groomers asking children to take pictures, pornographic pictures of themselves and share it with them. Now, once it's shared with the groomer, it goes into networks and it can get shared anywhere within the UK, anywhere within the world. The UK is the biggest consumer of child sexual abuse images. The police reckon there are 850,000 people in the UK consuming child sexual abuse images. This is what we're talking about. Yes.
I wonder, I thank her for giving way and for making such an impassioned, powerful speech. Does she agree with me that the outrage really ought to be directed at us for not doing enough on these issues, rather than for the way in which we have started to try and tackle these issues? Because it seems to me that the behaviours that she's referring to and other honourable members have referred to, were they to happen in the real world or so-called offline world, they would be clamped down upon immediately. People would be arrested. You cannot publish certain items. You cannot put them in newsagents. You cannot smuggle them into school libraries and get away with your defence of being, this is a matter of my civil liberty. And so we should be far more robust with these online companies in the, frankly, for the shoddy way in which they are carrying about their activities, which is endangering our children and doing immense damage to our political system and to wider life in our country and beyond.
Emily Darlington.
Yes, I completely agree, and I was going to come to that. I recently met with the NSPCC, the Internet Watch Foundation, and the police forces that deal with this. And what they said to me is there are easy technological fixes to this. When you upload something to an end-to-end encryption site, and for those who don't know, we use them all the time. That's our WhatsApp groups. That's Facebook Messenger. Those are end-to-end encryption sites. They're not scary sites that we don't know the words of, or we hear a Telegram might be a bit iffy. These are sites that we all use every single day. They said to me that before you upload and before it becomes encrypted, your image, your message is screened for bugs. It's screened to make sure that you're not sharing viruses, but it could equally be screened for child sexual abuse images. And it could be stopped before it was even shared. It would stop these children from even sharing it in the first place. And then it would stop the collection of them and those collections being shared with other paedophiles. So, you are absolutely right. 63% of British parents want the government to go further and faster. 50% feel our implementation has been too slow. And that's not surprising. It took 7 years to get this piece of legislation through, and the reality is, by the time it got through, half of it was out of date. Because technology moves faster than Parliament. Yes?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's been talking about the dangers that children are exposed to. Does she believe that parents are currently equipped to talk to their children about these dangers? And is there more we could do to support parents to have very frank conversations with their children about the risks of sharing images and talking to people online?
I completely agree with you. As parents, we all want to be able to have those conversations. But because of the way the algorithms work, we don't see what they see. We actually do not see what they see. And we say, yes, you can download this game because it has a 4+ rating. Well, who knows what a 4+ rating actually means? It's got nothing to do with the BBFC ratings, which we all grew up with and understand really well. 4+ is a made-up thing. Somebody else has decided what's all right. So Roblox is, I think it's trying to remember its exact name, but it looks like it's child-ready. The thing about Roblox, which many people might not understand, is Roblox is a platform that anybody can develop a game and put on there. Those games can involve grooming children. Those games can involve sexual violence. Those games aren't all about the silly dances that the children do in the schoolyard. And that platform is equally inhabited by children as it is of adults.
She does well to draw attention to the gaming world, because I think most of us, when we think about the online threats, we think about social media, we think about messaging, but actually there are interactive ways of communicating across almost every game in existence, and that can happen across the world. Does she show me my concern? In Oldham, we've had a number of Section 60 stop and search orders in place because of the number of school children that have been carrying knives and dangerous weapons, and that is whipped up largely, not particularly in the classroom, but online overnight when children are making threats to each other and winding them up. And where we are, it has real life consequences. Children have been injured and unfortunately killed as a result of carrying weapons in our community. Does she share my concern that actually the threat on here is multifaceted, and so the legislation needs probably not to be so prescriptive at a point in time for particular platforms at a point in time, but to have founding principles that can be far more agile as new technology comes on stream?
You raised two really important points. The first is, if we try and create our legislation to actually address what the companies are doing today, it will be out of date by the time it passes through the two houses. So what we need to do is that on the basis of principles, and I think a very good principle to start on is what's illegal offline should be illegal online. Yeah. And that's a pretty clear principle, and has been, the offline legislation has been robustly challenged over hundreds of years and got us to the place we are in terms of our freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to congregate, all of these things have been robustly tested by both houses. Yeah?
On that really important, critically important point about the equality or lack of equality between offline and online, does she agree with me that were I to go out into the street and staple onto the back of somebody an offensive but not illegal statement that was impermeable to any washing off and stuck on their back for months, if not years, I would be subject to arrest probably immediately. And yet online this is what happens routinely to our children, to anyone in society, including politicians. And isn't that illustrative of the problem that we have?
I agree. It's a very important point my honourable member has raised. The slander that happens online, the lack of basis in reality, the lack of ability then to address it. If somebody posts something about you that is untrue, platforms won't take it down. They'll say it doesn't breach our terms and conditions. So they could turn around, somebody could post that I'm actually purple and have, you know, pink eyes, and I'd say, I don't want you to say that, and the platform would say, but there's nothing offensive about that. And say, but it's not me. And the thing is, this is happening in much more offensive ways. I think the other point that my honourable member raised before that I wanted to raise is what is happening online is then being repeated, online is then being repeated offline. And we've seen deaths from these challenges that get set, and then children trying to replicate the challenges they see online. And with AI-generated material, often these challenges are not necessarily true. It's the equivalent of somebody trying to repeat magic tricks and dying as a result. And this is quite worrying. So I don't want to say that the Online Safety Act is perfect, but it does need to go further. I think the petitioner has raised a really important point. The lack of proper definition around what are small but non-harmful sites versus small but harmful sites is very unclear, and I think it's really important that the OSA provide some clarity on that. We do not have enough protections for democracy. The Select Committee did a really important report, the Science Select Committee, which I sit on, did a really important report on misinformation and how that led to the riots 2 summers ago. That misinformation was used as a rallying cry to create unrest across our country, which we haven't seen in a very, very long time. The response from the social media companies was variable. I would say it was kind of meh to really awful. And the reality is they say we don't police our content, we're just a platform. That is naive in its extreme, and quite frankly, they're happy to make money off of us. They should also know that they have to protect their customers, just as any other company does, as my honourable member mentioned. The radicalisation that is happening online is actually shifting the Overton window. We are seeing a more divided country. We are understanding more and more. There's a fantastic book called Man Up. If you haven't read it, it's a very academic book, but it shows the rise of misogyny leading to the rise in every other part of extremism and how that links back to the online world. If this was all about Islam, this house would be outraged. But the fact that it starts with misogyny, it goes down with a fizzle, and too often we have people in this house who say that this is all about free speech. We know that misogyny now is the first step on a radicalization ladder that leads you to violence, whether that's against women or further into anti-Semitism, anti-Islam, anybody who's not the same colour, or anybody who's perceived not to be English from Norman times. The algorithms provoke violent and shocking content, but they also shadow ban really important content like women's health. So they're happy to shadow ban terms like endometriosis and tampon, and God forbid the tampon commercial has red liquid rather than blue liquid. That gets shadow banned, regularly taken down, regularly taken out of the algorithms, yet they can do nothing about people threatening to rape and harm. That's not true. They can, and they choose not to. In fact, the public also agrees that algorithms must be part of our solution, and British parents want, 78% of British parents want to see action on algorithms. And my honourable friends are right that the Online Safety Act could do that, Ofcom could do that, yet they haven't. They have yet to actually create transparency in the algorithms. It was the #1 recommendation from the Science Select Committee. Finally, I want to talk about a few other areas that we need to go very quickly on. Deepfakes and AI nudifying apps. We've already seen an example of how a deepfake is being used in British democracy. The honourable member from the opposite side of the House has already had a deepfake done of him, saying that he is moving from the Conservatives to Reform. It is a very convincing 3-minute video. Facebook still refuse to take it down because it doesn't breach their terms. This should be a warning to us all about how individuals, state actors and non-state actors can impact our local democracy by creating deepfakes of each and any one of us that we can't get taken down. Yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. We heard today from MI6's chief, who was talking about how Russia is seeking to export chaos into Western democracies and that the UK is one of the most targeted of those Western democracies. Does she agree with me that we need online safety because it is in fact our national security too, and that as we do have the rise of the threat from Putin and the Kremlin, that we need as a country to be secure in air, on sea, on land, and in fact in the digital space?
Yes, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. What they seek to promote is chaos and the destruction of British values, and we need to fight and protect those. The AI nudifying apps, which weren't even in existence when the Online Safety Act came in, need a very quick, fast approach. At the moment, we know deepfakes and AI nudifying apps are being used on classmates and colleagues overwhelmingly. How do you think that destroys a 13-year-old girl to have a nude photo of her passed around that is fake? The abuse that we receive as politicians, but many people receive from fake and anonymous accounts, needs to be addressed. 71% of British people consider this to be a problem, and we need to take action. And AI chatbots, as already been mentioned, is an area that, again, the Online Safety Act did not foresee in its development and therefore is far behind. So, in conclusion, the Online Safety Act is in no way perfect, but it is a good step forward, and we must learn the lessons of this implementation to go further and faster and listen to British parents across this country who want our help as the government to protect our children online, but also we must, as a government, protect our democracy online. Thank you.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr Hayes. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I congratulate the member for Sunderland Central for a very eloquent opening speech and a debate across the chamber today, which has touched on really important elements. And as the member for Sunderland Central mentioned, the online space gives this great opportunity for connection and knowledge gathering, but also a great opportunity for greater harms. And I think what has come across today is that we have these addictive algorithms which are pushed for these commercial and malevolent interests with no regard for the harm that it has or impact that it has on individuals or society, but what it has on commercial or indeed security interests and not in the security of Great Britain. When it comes to the Online Safety Act, which is under debate today, we must get that balance right. Those protections for children and vulnerable are absolutely vital. It is, of course, important to maintain that freedom of speech and access to information. And the Online Safety Act is a step in the right direction, protecting children from that extreme content, and we've seen changes in pornographic content. However, there are areas where the Online Safety Act hasn't gone far enough. It isn't ready for the changes that are coming at a fast pace. While there are websites serving a public good, which are age-gated, and forums, as has been mentioned, for hobbies and communities, which are being blocked. As Liberal Democrats are saying, we have to get this right, and we need to get that balance right. We also have to look at something like a digital Bill of Rights, which is agile standards in the face of these fast-paced changes to embed safety by design at the base. When it comes to protecting children and online and vulnerable people, those harms are real. The speeches from members across the House have been, as always, eye-opening and a reminder of just how important this is. When it comes to that pornographic content, we heard from the member from Morecambe and Lonsdale, and also from the member from Milton Keynes Central, and some very sickening reminder, actually, of the horrific content online that actually young people see, and not by choice. And what has also been mentioned, which is really important for us to never forget, is that it's often people not seeking this content, but it comes through, whether it's on now what is X, or Twitter, or other platforms. And the Molly Rose Foundation highlighted that children using TikTok and X were twice as likely to have encountered high-risk content as users from other platforms. What has been mentioned, the online world coming to life, I have one constituent from Harpenden who wrote to me horrified about the fact that her daughter was strangled on the dance floor, because it showed how this violent, graphic content is becoming normalised. And that really struck me to my core. And of course, there's the other content that has been mentioned, whether it's suicidal content, violent content, mentioned eating disorders, and that misinformation that the member for Worcester talked so eloquently about. And the Molly Rose Foundation also highlighted that 1 in 10 of harmful videos of TikTok have been viewed over 1 million times. And so we have young people seeing this extreme content. But I think what's also important is beyond that extreme content is starting to see that addictive nature of social media, and that insidious part where it's becoming such a normalised part of many of our lives, of seeing this short form content. Recent polling that the Liberal Democrats did revealed that 80% of parents of school-aged children reported negative behaviours due to excessive phone usage, whether that was skipping meals, having difficulty sleeping, or reporting physical discomfort such as eye strain or headaches. Parents and teachers know those real harms that are coming through, but also young people themselves do too. I also carried out a Safer Screens tour in my constituency and spoke to young people, and many of them said, I am seeing extreme content that I do not want to see. And actually, I've blocked that content, but it comes back. Now, the Online Safety Act is helping to change that, but it's still not gone far enough. And I think that element of this addictive part of social media is important. In surveys we did, there were 2 quotes that really stood out to me from young people. So one sixth former said that they said social media was addictive as a drug, and they felt the negative effects every day. And another one simply wrote, help, I just can't stop. Young people are asking for help and protection, and that we need to hold those social media giants to account and online spaces to account. And what is welcome in the Online Safety Act is that some of those harms have been tackled. When it comes to pornography, we've seen that Pornhub has seen a 77% reduction in visitors in the website, and Ofcom has launched 76 investigations into pornography providers, with one fine of 50,000 for failing to introduce age checks. We need to ask, though, if that's far enough. And I think what's come across loud and clear today is that actually the Online Safety Act hasn't gone far enough. And actually, analysis has shown that Instagram, TikTok have also started to introduce new design features which comply with the Online Safety Act, but actually are gaming the system to basically still put forward the content in their commercial interests that actually are not in the interests of young people. We also, the other harms that have been mentioned, which are extremely important, is, for example, those new harms from AI. We have many more who are turning to AI for mental health support. We have generative AI, which is creating graphic content, and the Internet Watch Foundation found reports of generated sexual abuse material has more than doubled in the past, and they're actually at a point where they're saying we cannot tell the difference anymore. It's horrific. They're saying yes, absolutely.
She makes a very important point. The one thing that's really concerned me is just how desensitised young people or adults can become when they see that type of content. And I do think the bridge between that inhumane content that you're seeing has a direct link then to misogyny. I think it has a direct link then to racism that we see, where that is definitely the case. And does she share my concern? Is that we cannot allow, and I know no member in this House does, but you could see an argument being made outside of this place, where generative AI is not real harm because it's not real in itself. There's not real abuse being carried out, but there absolutely is. And the real danger is that it entraps even more people down that very dark route to essentially child abuse and further types of harm that presents then in the real world in a way that I don't think even Parliament yet has registered. In a sense, we're getting to this being more and more of a public health crisis.
Absolutely. And I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. And I think I think the insidious part of this is how it is becoming normalised. And I remember when I was debating in the data bill about even creatives in AI, is that it was the first time I'd feel between 2 weeks of one debate, actually you'd had the release of Google VO3, which was the all singing, all dancing, video creating software, which meant that we were moving so quickly that some people we don't see how good they are, because actually some content you're seeing online is probably AI and you don't realise. And on top of that is actually, as you said, it normalises this extreme content or things that people think are real but are not. And that is very dangerous for society. And indeed, actually, my next point was around deep fakes, which are undermining trust. Now, some of those are obvious deep fakes, whether that's also some members of Parliament that have been a part of deep fakes. There's also news presenters. But I think what is just as important is all of that content which actually seems normal, but what it's doing is undermining trust in what we see. So we don't know what's real, we don't know what isn't anymore, and that is going to be very dangerous, not only in terms of extreme content, but in terms of our democracy, which I think has been put forward today as well. But what's also worrying is that the social media platforms don't seem to see that problem. So there was a recent results from the Ofcom risk assessment report, so Ofcom analysed 104 platforms, and they put in their own submissions. And not one single social media platform classified itself as high risk for suicide, eating disorder, or depression. And I think, a lot of what we've heard this morning, and whether it's both statistical and also anecdotal stories, show that is just not true. I would say, on the other hand, I also think there are elements where the Online Safety Act hasn't gone enough in terms of online protection. It's also overstepped the mark. When the Online Safety Act, when the Children's Code came into place, myself and Lord Clement Jones wrote to Secretary of State outlining some of those concerns, which included political content being age-gated, educational sites like Wikipedia being designated as Category 1, and important forums, some of which weren't mentioned today, but also that include LGBTQ+ rights, sexual health, or potential sensitive topics that actually had been age-gated but were important for many who were learning about the world. And I have someone, Jamie from Harpenden, a young person who relied on that internet heavily for education. He found that when he was looking for resources, actually a lot was flagged as threatening to children, blocked, and he felt that actually that kind of stopped his education. So there is that balance to get right. And of course, age assurance systems, which could pose a problem to data protection and privacy. And the intention behind this legislation was never to limit access to political or educational content. And it's important to support those which many rely on. But to bring my comments to a close, we have to protect children and vulnerable people online. And we must get that balance right. But I have a few questions for the Minister. Whether he agrees with Liberal Democrats about a cross-party committee from both houses of Parliament to review the Online Safety Act, If the Minister will confirm what resources Ofcom have given and what analysis has been given that Ofcom have enough resources to tackle these issues, what the government is doing about AI labelling, watermarking, and what they're doing about to tackle deepfakes. If the Minister also agrees that it's time to support the well-being of our children rather than the pockets of big tech, and that the Minister will support the Liberal Democrat calls to increase the age of data consent, banning social media giants from collecting children's data and powering those addictive algorithms against them, calling for public health warnings on addictive social media for under 18s and a doom scroll cap. But most importantly, I think, is that digital Bill of Rights and standards that are going to come across this fast-paced change and needs to be agile. Our young people deserve better. We need to put children and young people and vulnerable people before the profits of big tech. And we won't stop fighting until that change is done. So thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. I now call the opposition spokesman and Shadow Minister, Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, not least because it means you cannot speak. And I think you would very happily take up a good hour of the debate talking about the perils and ills of the internet and how it needs to be shut down. So it's probably for the better that...
That's all true, by the way.
And I congratulate the Honourable Member for Sunderland Central for introducing this debate. I think he has made a particularly excellent contribution, if I may say, to last week's petition debate on mandatory digital identity. And whilst his party's leadership may not have thanked him, I'm sure that his constituents did. And he is right about what he has said today, that the internet allows unprecedented connection. That's for good, but also for ill. And our job is to balance that inherent tension, but perhaps also to recognise that sometimes there is no balance to be had. And we have to make a choice when it comes to children being served a toxic online diet of extreme content. And that choice for us as a government was the Online Safety Act, about which thousands of petitioners have raised concerns, believing that its breadth and its scope are having too restrictive effect. Now, I do have some sympathy with those concerns because the Act is large and it's very complex. And while it is proving effective in protecting children in many ways, implementation undoubtedly comes with challenges, whether that's VPN usage or inadvertent capturing of no to low risk sites in compliance duties.
Honourable friend, give on that point, on the point of VPNs. ChildNet have discovered that there's been increased downloading of VPNs by children over the last 3 months as adolescents use it to circumvent the age verification processes. Now, I was interested to hear what the Honourable Member for Sunderland Central said, which I presume is the Open Rights Group. I just had a quick look at the research. So whilst it says it's not the very youngest children, it is children from 13 plus, so these are still vulnerable adolescents. Would my honourable friend agree with me that for the online safety bill to be successful, the use of VPNs has to be further examined?
I would agree with that, and I think I'm interested to know what the Minister has to say about the VPN issue, whether they themselves should be age-gated, whether we should look at App Store controls that would ensure that parents have to effectively consent to the downloads of VPN apps by children and so on, whether there may be other more effective ways of doing that. Now, the sites that we talked about may be smaller community forums or they might be volunteer run, but they are often also mid-sized tech companies who don't have the resource of the social media giants to navigate the legal risks and intricacies of the Act without diverting precious capacity that might otherwise be used to innovate and expand their businesses. And I've talked to some of these businesses. They may have one person who can do legal compliance, and if they are looking at the next stage of the OSA's implementation, they may be pulled off other work which is actually helping to grow the economy. I think this is something we have to take very seriously and look into, because a lot of these sites are effectively no risk whatsoever, and I think the OSA probably is too burdensome for them. We don't want to see the Act stifle our vital tech sector, and I know concerns too have been raised about freedom of speech and user privacy, and again I can understand those concerns in principle. There have been some instances, particularly when age verification first came into play over the summer, where there seems to have been a practical impact with post restricted. However, it does seem that those early examples have been recycled many times to suggest that the Act is having a wholesale dampening effect on what people feel confident saying online, and I'm not sure that that actually is the case. Indeed, I think those concerns are often conflated with other issues such as the policing of tweets, non-crime hate incidents, the application of legislation like the Public Order Act, and outrageous cases of state overreach like that of Graham Linehan. We must also be mindful, dare I say it, of those who will seek to exaggerate those concerns for the sake of big tech's commercial interests. And I note the comments of the Honourable Member of Oldham West and Royston about the power that platforms hold. On the other side of the ledger are worries that it remains relatively straightforward for under 18s to access pornography. There is no foolproof way to age-gate the internet. I think we have to see the Online Safety Act as a first step in a pushback against the wholly unacceptable situation that we witnessed previously. Yes, of course, some children seek out material and will continue to do so with determination. But far too many others had previously been stumbling across explicit or illegal material by complete accident. Studies suggest, and I think they've been cited already here today, that 41% of children first encountered porn on X rather than because they were actually seeking it out. If the Online Safety Act has a material impact in reducing that risk, it will have served its purpose. And the Honourable Lady for Milton Keynes Central provided some truly shocking statistics and rightly said we are putting porn back on the top shelf. And as she was saying so, I thought back to when I was a teenager and the advent of magazines like Zoo and Nuts, which were seen as absolutely dreadful explicit content which is far too readily available, and now it seems actually quite quaint when we think about what children can access now. Pornhub has reported a 77% reduction in visitors after implementing age verification measures. However, it is important to note that traffic previously going to sites like Pornhub has not simply disappeared. A chunk of that has shifted to smaller sites that may be potentially riskier, and in some cases which think that they can actually financially benefit from not implementing age gating, which is actually against the law. And for those sites, I think they need to know that Ofcom fines are coming. No website should assume it can sidestep its legal duties, and these fines are designed to outweigh any short-term commercial advantage gained by ignoring the law. I don't believe that the best way of dealing with any of these concerns is to repeal the Online Safety Act, and I think it's fair to say that nobody in the Chamber today has advocated for that. I think it's for us to review it and to work out how we tighten up child safety while being honest about those aspects of the law which do need to change. The last Conservative government passed the Act in 2024, and it was a very long and winding road to get there. But it was one of the first markers that was put down globally on internet regulation that said that status quo, where children had easy access to illegal explicit content, could simply not continue. As the Honourable Lady from Morecambe and Lonsdale suggested, we cannot have untrammelled freedom for adults in this space. It was a status quo that has caused significant harm to children, and it's right that we now expect more from social media platforms who were given an opportunity to self-regulate and were found wanting. The Act has driven them to make design changes to help parents, children and teenagers. That includes Meta's teen accounts and some aspects of Roblox. Without these protections, more children would encounter harmful content, receive unsolicited contact from adults, and access material encouraging self-harm, eating disorders, or even suicide. Families would also continue to face barriers when seeking answers from tech companies following tragedies. Pressure on those companies is going to continue for as long as we see technology's pernicious effects on our children, including recently the encouragement by chatbot of a teenager into suicide. Despite the criticisms levelled at this law, it remains popular with parents because, while of course they must remain sovereign in how children are raised and have the parenting confidence to deny phones and social media to their children, no matter how involved or savvy parents are, they need help with these challenges. They are able to creep into the heart of people's homes in a way that we have not seen before, and they can find their way to their child through what other children may be sharing with them. In the years that the Act was being drawn up, we made a lot of changes, including removing provisions relating to content that is legal but harmful in 2022. And I think that is all for the good, because as we can see, Ofcom has an enormous job on its hands dealing with some of the biggest online problems, such as age-gating pornography. I think had we taken an expansionist approach, we would now be facing far greater problems around free speech, and Ofcom would have an even heavier role as arbiter of the public square. Not to mention the workload. And I think this is something that honourable members need to think about very carefully. There's been, what happened effectively with the OSA was that it became a Christmas tree on which everybody hung quite niche individual concerns, and it became unimplementable. And I think that is the risk if the Labour government wishes to go down a sort of more restrictive route in some of these areas. It has to be mindful about you need something that can actually be implemented in law, and you need to resource the regulator to be able to do that implementation. It's also true to say that the status quo was actually having negative impacts for journalistic content. So there's lots of discussion about freedom of speech, but long before the Act was brought in, I recall as Media Minister, having discussions with traditional news content providers who were extremely frustrated by West Coast content moderators who were arbitrarily taking their content down with no opportunity to appeal. And what we did with this legislation was introduce must-carry provisions that would give a greater chance for proper news content providers to have that content visible. Again, that's a very important thing for journalistic credibility, for making sure that we have truth in online spaces. The Online Safety Act, as I've said, represents the start of a journey as countries grapple to find the right framework through which adults can retain their freedom on the internet while children are treated as children. And I think this debate is particularly timely because we see the new social media ban in Australia introduced last week, and it's something my party is going to be watching very, very closely. Concerns about social media and mobile phones go actually far beyond the ability to access porn or illegal content. We as a party are very concerned about the impact of social media and smartphone use on children's mental health, education, social development. I think I suspect any honourable member that's been to a school recently in their constituency will have heard just about the challenges that are to the learning environment, to the social interactions between children, the challenges that parents are facing at home. This goes, as I say, way beyond just a matter of illegal content. And we've heard of other concerns. The honourable member for Worcester, I like the way he described it as a veritable chemistry lab of psychoactive substances. And he made some very, very interesting observations about safety and how we have to think very carefully as a democracy about broader harms. Now, the Act will be statutorily reviewed next year, and I would welcome the Minister telling us whether the government is examining measures of this nature that have been discussed today, including whether GDPR protections on the processing of children's data might be raised from age 13 to 16. I think age gating also needs attention. Reports of VPN use suggest children are, as I say, have been circumventing protections, and we have to consider whether age gating should be applied more comprehensively, including to VPN use or via App Store or device level to close those loopholes. I think also adults need to be assured of the privacy-preserving nature of the age verification tools they are using, and I know that there are concerns about the volume of sensitive data being collected. I think we also, as I've described, need to ensure that low-risk tech firms really aren't being disproportionately burdened. There was a huge amount of work that had to go into the July phase that Ofcom was going through when it came to age verification, and I think they are worried that there'll be a sort of further step change that they need to make in terms of regulatory compliance and just the burden that will have on them. Regulation has to remain proportionate, targeting high-risk sites and services without undermining innovation or our competitive position in tech. We also need to examine, as has been discussed many times today, the emerging technologies such as generative AI chatbots, as suggested by the Honourable Gentleman for Dewsbury and Batley and for Worcester. The legal position under the OSA is not yet entirely clear, but children are increasingly exposed to AI-generated content, and we need to know if the Act is flexible enough to deal with innovations of this kind. As we've described today, I think the Online Safety Act is a necessary first step, but it is only the beginning of a much longer fight to protect childhood. We have to create the space for childhood and adolescence away from screens with all the richness and stimulation that the real world can bring. Parents ultimately can never cease their vigilance. The internet cannot be made wholly safe. And I think we cannot be naive about that. Ultimately, parents have to remain the ultimate backstop to making sure that their children are safe online, but they need help. And it's our role as legislators to provide some of those tools and assistance in helping children through their childhoods. I hope we look back at the time before the Online Safety Act and wonder how we ever allowed the exposure of children to an unbridled internet culture that has hitherto been the norm. And to return to the Honourable Gentleman for Sunderland Central's opening remark, the internet has led to the creation of new bonds, of huge multiplication of opportunity, but simultaneously opportunity for harm, and sometimes we do need to make a choice, and while the Online Safety Act is undoubtedly imperfect, the imperative to protect children will always, for me, take precedence, and if social media platforms are held to greater account, then so be it.
Thank you. Minister of State for the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, Ian Murray.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir John. It's great to see you in the chair. I didn't realise you were such a technophobe until we heard from the Shadow Minister. I'm disappointed you weren't able to give a contribution in this particular debate. But can I start firstly by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Sunderland Central, for moving the motion on behalf of the Petitions Committee to this debate, and along with other speakers for their contributions. And I haven't been on the RTG fans message board that you mentioned right at the start, but I'm sure it's been very, very busy this weekend, and I wondered if some of the trolls that were mentioned by our friend opposite were perhaps wearing the black and white over the weekend. But he did raise a really important point, that it is the site managers and the volunteers who are hosting these forums that are keeping them legitimate and indeed working very hard to abide by the law. I have a site of great importance that's very clear to me called Jambo's Kickback, that's for my own football team, and there's many people that use that to find out what's going on, what's happening. And it is run by volunteers and run with no money at all, but just for the sheer love of having these forums together, so fully understand the petitioner in terms of what they want to bring. And kind of thank him for the way and the measured way in which he put forward the e-petition. He called for robust, effective, proportionate regulation, and I think that's what the Online Safety Act and what this government is trying to work through. And the Shadow Minister highlighted that by going through the ledger of what's positive and what's negative in terms of the issues that we're having to face as a government, and indeed when the Honourable Lady's party was in government. But the one thing on that ledger that is non-negotiable is the safety of children online. And I think everyone has made that particular point. In fact, I'm disappointed that the people who haven't made that point aren't in here debating and trying to win that particular argument. So I'll be very interested to hear what they have to say. This petition, Sir John, received over 550,000 signatures, and while I do appreciate the concerns that have been raised through the petition, I must reiterate the government's very strong response that we have no plans to repeal the Online Safety Act. Parents should be able to have confidence that their children, and as a parent and father of 2 young girls, 5 and 10 months, we must know and we must be confident they are safe when they access popular online services, and they can benefit from the opportunities that the online world offers. And that's why the government is working closely with Ofcom to implement the Act as quickly and as effectively as possible to enable UK users to benefit from the Act's protections. 2025 has been a year of significant action on online safety. On the 17th of March, the Illegal Harms Code of Practice came into effect. The Illegal Harms Code will drive significant improvements in online safety in several areas. Services are now required to put in place measures to reduce the risk of their services facilitating illegal content and activity, including terrorism, child sexual abuse and exploitation, and other kinds of legal activity. And I did ask the officials for a list of the priority offences that are in the Act, and there's 17 of them that have now been increased to 20 with the new Secretary of State at the Department adding some others. But I think it's just worth reading through those, because it does show you both the problem but also the scale of it. And I've been really struck by the contributions of members who've talked about the real world and the online world, and if any of these were happening in the real world, you'd be immediately carted off to jail rather than being allowed to continue to operate online. The priority offences are assisted suicide, threats to kill, public order offences like harassment, stalking and fear of provocation of violence, drugs and psychoactive substances, firearms and other weapons, assisted illegal immigration, human trafficking, sexual exploitation, sexual images, intimate images of children, proceeds of crime, fraud, financial services fraud, foreign interference, animal welfare, terrorism, controlling or coercive behaviour, and the new ones that have been added by the Secretary of State, self-harm, cyber-flashing and strangulation porn. Do we honestly have to write that into a schedule of an Online Safety Act to say that these things are unacceptable and should not be happening on our computers? Following the 17th of March and the 25th of July, the child safety regime came into force. Services now use highly effective age assurance to prevent children in the UK from encountering pornography and the content which encourages, promotes and provides instructions for self-harm, suicide or eating disorders. These platforms are also now legally required to put in place measures to protect children from other types of harmful content, and this includes abusive or hateful content, bullying content and violent content. We've all spoken to head teachers and parents when we visited schools about the real problem that schools are having at this moment in time. We're trying to deal with some of these bullying effects of social media. According to Ofcom's 4th of December report that some have referenced already, many services are now deploying age checks, including the top 10 most popular pornographic sites, the UK's most popular dating apps, and a wide range of other services including X, Telegram, Reddit, TikTok, Blue Sky, Discord, Xbox and Steam. This represents a safer online experience for millions and millions of children across the UK, and we've heard that it is already having an impact. However, the government recognises the importance of implementing these duties proportionately, and this is why proportionality is the core principle of the Act and is built into many of the duties contained within it. Ofcom's illegal content and child safety codes of practice set out recommended measures that are tailored to both size and risk to help providers comply with their obligations. It's really important to emphasise they are tailored to both size and risk to help providers comply with their legal obligations. When recommending steps providers can take to comply with their duties, Ofcom must consider the size and risk level of different types and kinds of services. Let me just concentrate on that for a little minute, Sir John, because, for instance, Ofcom recommends user blocking and muting measures to help protect children from harmful content, including bullying, violent content and other harmful materials. And these recommendations are tailored to services' size and risk profile. Specifically, Ofcom recommends that all services which are high risk for this content need to implement these measures in full. However, for services which are medium risk for this content, Ofcom suggests they only need to implement these measures if they have more than 700,000 users. However, while many services carry low risks of harm, risk assessment duties are key to ensuring that risky services of all sizes do not slip through the net of regulation. So, for example, the government is very concerned about small platforms that host the most harmful content, such as forums dedicated to encouraging suicide or self-harm. Exempting all small services from duties requiring them to tackle this type of content would mean these forums would not be subject to the Act's enforcement powers, and that's the reasoning why we reject the petitioners' views on this. Even forums that might seem harmless carrying potential risks, such as where adults are able to engage directly with child users. The government recognises the importance of ensuring that low-risk services do not have unnecessarily regulatory burdens placed upon them. I hope that reassures the Shadow Minister, and that is why in the Statement of Strategic Priorities issued on the 2nd of July, the government set out expectations that Ofcom should continue focusing its efforts on safety improvements among services that pose the highest risk of harm to users, including small but risky services. The government also explicitly made clear that Ofcom should ensure that expectations on low-risk services are proportionate. So alongside proportionate implementation of the Act, the government also understands the need to effectively communicate the new regulations and work with companies within its scope to ensure compliance is as easy as possible. To deliver this, Ofcom is providing support to online service providers of all sizes to make it easier for them to understand and comply with their responsibilities under the UK's new online safety laws. For example, Ofcom has already launched a regulation checker to help firms check whether they are covered by the new rules, as well as a number of quick guides for those that require those rules. Now, Sir John, let me just go through some of the issues that have been raised by my honourable friends and honourable members. The member for Oxford East started and raised the issue around pornography and other harmful content. User-to-user services which allow pornographic and content that promotes, provides instructions for, or encourages suicide, self-harm or eating disorders must use highly effective age assurance to prevent all children under 18 from accessing this type of content. Search services must take proportionate steps to minimise the risk of children encountering this type of content on their services, and services also need to put in place age-appropriate measures to protect children from harmful content, as bullying and violent content as well. Ofcom's protection of children's codes of practice set out what steps services can take to comply, and Ofcom has robust enforcement powers available to use against companies who fail to fulfil those really important duties, and we're already seeing this enforcement action. 6,000 sites have taken action to stop children seeing harmful content, primarily via age checks. 6,000 sites already, but that shows you the scale of the issue. May I touch on VPNs, which have been mentioned by a number of honourable members, including the Shadow Minister. Following the introduction of the child safety duties in July, Ofcom reported that UK daily active users of VPNs, virtual private networks apps, temporarily doubled to around 1.5 million. The average is normally about 750,000. Since then, usage of VPN apps has dropped, falling back to around 1 million by the end of September. This was expected and has happened in other jurisdictions that have introduced age checks. Services should take appropriate steps to mitigate against circumvention methods that are easily accessible to children. This is an Ofcom rule as well. If a provider is not complying with their age assurance duties by promoting VPN usage to bypass age assurance methods, Ofcom can take and should take enforcement action. So the use of VPNs does not protect the platforms from not complying with the Act itself. I'm happy to give way.
He's doing a huge amount of work on this issue, and it is appreciated, I'm sure, by all in the House. It can't be beyond the wit of man for these VPN companies to be able to bridge between the service user on one side and the ultimate website or platform that they're viewing on the other. So why aren't VPNs in scope of the legislation to make sure that on the age verification that they're compliant? because presumably it's more difficult for the end website to know the origins of the user if they're bypassing via a VPN. Surely the onus should be on the VPN company to comply with the law too.
It's a good point that my honourable friend makes. Let me come back to him in detail about the VPN issue, because I will come on to the review of the Online Safety Act and what we're planning to do, both written into legislation and not, in terms of the review of the Act, of which that forms part of the issue. Let me just go to the issue that was raised by my honourable friend from Darlington, who's no longer in our place, but a really important issue about chatbots. It's been raised by a number of other people as well. Generative AI services, including chatbots, that allow users to share content with one another, or that search live websites to provide search engines, are regulated under the Online Safety Act. They are already regulated. These services must protect users from legal content and children from harmful and age-inappropriate content. Have to give way?
Minister for giving way. There is just a clarification that actually I think what Ofcom have said, and my understanding is, yes, in certain circumstances AI chatbots are covered, but actually there are certain new harms that are coming out of AI chatbots, such as emotional dependence, which are not covered. And so I think that's also where actually the House and many people are asking for clarity.
Minister. Yeah, I don't disagree with the honourable lady, and in fact there's a whole host of issues around porn bots that have now sprung up as well, and a whole host of other issues around AI generated bots too. So we do know that we're committed to the Online Safety Act and its review as it's being implemented, of course, and as technology moves on quickly, we do have to keep up pace with what the harms are and how we're able to deal with that. So I do thank her for raising those particular issues. Can I just add a little bit about the evidence to act, because we will act on the evidence that comes forward, and it's clear if the evidence shows us that we have to act in various areas, including in chatbots, we will do so. The Secretary of State announced plans to support a Child Safety Summit in 2026, which will bring together the tech companies, civil society and young people to shape how AI can benefit children, but also we can look at the online harms and the benefits and the movements on them. I'm happy to give you
I just wanted to raise with the Minister that the Select Committee, the Science and Innovation Select Committee, will be undertaking an inquiry in the new year about brain development, the addictive nature, and how that impacts various key points in development for children. You say that you will look at, the Minister says that he will look at all evidence. Will he look at the evidence produced by this inquiry in order to ensure that that information and that advice then goes to parents across this country?
I'm very grateful, and thank you for all the work that you do on the committee, the relevant committee, and we'll, of course, the government has to respond in detail to these reports, and indeed we look forward to the recommendations it brings forward. There is no, and often we see this in the online world, there's no conspiracy theory here that the government are trying to defend a position against what evidence might come forward, and indeed we've just signed an MOU with Australia to look at their experiences of protecting children online and whether or not there are things that we can do in this country, but actually it's got to be evidence-based, and if the evidence base is there, we'll certainly make sure to act, because it is non-negotiable that we protect young people and children online. Can I just address, I'm happy to give way.
I think there is no disagreement, I don't think, on the protection of children, and there's no disagreement on that we already have legislated for to be illegal content. I think where there is more debate needed is on harmful but not illegal content, and just where that line is and what we enforce. And secondly, the protections for those who aren't children, particularly vulnerable users and those that are being exploited and frankly drawn into some quite extreme behaviours. And I just wonder, we might as well be kind of honest about where some of these tensions are. How confident is the UK government going to be in entering into negotiations on this, when we are in the position on trade with the US, and the US has made it very clear that they see any further regulation on social media platforms to be an infringement on trade and freedom of speech? When it comes to making that call, where will the UK government be?
To the point that he makes, because freedom of expression is actually guaranteed in the Act itself, and whilst we are regulating to make sure that children and young people are protected online, he's right to suggest that that doesn't mean that we're censoring stuff for adult content. And the internet is a place whereby people can access content if they are age verified to do so, but it cannot be illegal content. And the list of issues that I read out at the start, which is in Schedule 7 of the Act, is pretty clear about what you're not allowed to do online. So any illegal content online still remains illegal. And indeed, we should need to work very clearly with the online platforms to make sure that that is not being purveyed through their platforms. And we've seen very much strong examples of that in recent months. And indeed, it was, and if you reflect back to Southport, it was indeed the local newspapers that actually, we discussed this many times before, that the public turned to because they wanted fast, regular but trustworthy news. They turned away from the social media channels to get that proper story that they knew they could trust the local newspaper that they were able to pick up and read. So the public, I think, do have a very strong understanding of where we are, but I do take the point around people who are not as tech savvy or indeed are impaired in some way that may need some more and some further protections from that. It's an argument that he makes very strongly. Can I just raise a little bit, if I may, Sir John, about AI chatbots? Somebody mentioned in terms of mental health. We're very clear that AI must not replace trained professionals. The government's 10-year health plan lays foundations for a digital front door for mental health care. Last month, the Secretary of State urged Ofcom to use existing powers to protect children from the potential harms of AI chatbots, and she is clear she is considering what more needs to be done. So in terms of the mental health issue, both the Department for Health and Social Care are looking at this through the 10-year plan, but also the Secretary of State's been clear that she will not allow the issues around chatbots and AI chatbots to be affecting young people's mental health, but also in terms of the development of them that we've heard from the Liberal Democrat spokesperson. Let me just touch on freedom of expression, because I think it's really important to balance that out. It's on the other side of the Shadow Minister's ledger and right to be there, because safeguards to protect freedom of expression and privacy are built in throughout the Online Safety Act. Services must consider how to protect users' rights when applying safety measures, including users' rights to express themselves freely. Providers do not need to take action on content which is beneficial to children, only against content which poses a risk of harm to children on their services. And the Act does not prevent adults from seeking out legal content and does not restrict people posting legal content that others of opposing views may find offensive. There is no removing of freedom of speech. It's a cornerstone of this government, and the Act platforms, the Act platforms have duties to protect freedom of speech. It's written into legislation. Let me just reiterate again, the Online Safety Act does not take any or nothing to limit freedom of speech. In fact, it protects it. And I think the member for Worcester was very clear when he said, and I thought his wonderful contribution, that making the internet a safe space promotes freedom of speech, and it does do that because it allows us all to have the confidence that we can use online social media platforms and know that we trust what we are reading and what we are seeing, and we know that our children can use it trusting that they are getting exposed to the things that are age appropriate. There is let's just go again to age assurance that was mentioned by the member for Dewsbury and Batley. Ofcom is required to produce a report on the use of age assurance technologies, including the effectiveness of age assurance, due July 2026, so in 6 or 7 months' time. This would allow sufficient time for these measures to embed in before they were considering further action. However, the government continues to monitor the impact of circumvention techniques such as VPNs and the effectiveness of the Act in protecting children, and we will not hesitate to go further if necessary, but we're due that report in July 2026, which will be 12 months from the implementation of the regulations itself. The Lib Dem spokesperson continued to ask about the reviewing of the Act. My previous comments cover some of that, but it's also critical that we understand how effective the online safety regime is, and monitoring and evaluating that is key. So my department, Ofcom and the Home Office have developed a framework to monitor the implementation of that and evaluate the core outcomes from it. I'm happy to give way.
Thank you for giving way. He describes the review of the Act and how we have a rapidly growing list of potential harms. It strikes me that we're up against a very agile and rapidly developing world. I recently visited the BBC Blue Room and saw the leading edge of consumer available technology, and it was quite disturbing to see the capabilities that are coming online soon. In the review of the Act, is there scope to move from a register of harms into perhaps domains of safety? For example, trauma, addiction, attachment, where the obligation would be on service providers or manufacturers to ensure their products were safe across these domains. And once again, there is security for smaller businesses available from the world of technical standards, where if you're offering a simple service and you meet an industry-developed standard, you have presumption of compliance. The BSI have demonstrated very rapid development of these through the PAS system, and that's available to help us navigate this rapidly. So could that be in scope?
Very kind. Minister.
Indeed very kind, and let me just address that, because I think the two examples that my honourable friend gave during his contribution in terms of the brakes issue, which are only available to high-end cars and expensive, are now on all cars, and indeed the building regulations in terms of building a balcony without a barrier. Now, these seem fairly obvious and almost fairly flippant, but actually, when you put it in the context of the online world, it seems strange that we can regulate very heavily to make sure people are safe, and nobody would ever deny that we shouldn't be putting barriers. Or it's a complete disregard for people's freedom to have a barrier on the front of an 18th floor balcony, but we do that to keep people safe, and particularly to keep children safe, as you say. If you're keeping adults safe, you're ultimately keeping children safe in that sense as well. So yes, you know, we have to continue to monitor and evaluate, and I was just about to come on to post-implementation review of the Act, which I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman will be very keen to also input into, but the Secretary of State must complete a review of the online safety regime 2 to 5 years after Part 3 of the Act, which is about the duties of care, when it fully comes into force. So the review will be completed no sooner than 2029. Now, these are long timescales, of course, and technology is moving, so I do understand what the Honourable Gentleman is saying, and I do recall from the Parliament in 2010 to 2015, we regulated for the telephone. So we do move slowly, and we understand that we have to be nimble to be able to do that. Can I just very quickly on to the Lib Dem spokesperson asked about, has the Act gone far enough? Ofcom, the regulator, is taking an iterative approach and will strengthen codes of practice as online harms technology and the evidence evolve. We're already making improvements, for example, strengthening the law to tackle self-harm, cyber flashing and strangulation. You asked whether or not the Ofcom has had an increase in resources. Yes, it has. Ofcom spending has increased nearly 30% in the last year in recognition of its increased responsibilities. You also asked about the digital age of consent, and I've mentioned it already. We've signed a memorandum of understanding with Australia. I'm encouraged with them to engage with them to understand their approach in terms of what they're taking, and any action will be, of course, on a robust evidence base. Of course, I'm happy to do it.
Thank you. I'd just like to clarify as well, it's a call for age of data consent we put forward as an amendment earlier this year, which is actually a very first step is to stop social media companies from harvesting that data and using it to power those addictive algorithms against young people. And so it's about data consent to 16. And then there is, of course, that wider discussion that's happening of what's happening of social media in general. But it's that data consent which is our first call to action.
Yes, I take the point, and indeed, you know, the amendment was there for that the Liberal Democrats put forward. You also asked for that cross-party committee to act. I've already talked about the implementation of the regulations review that will happen in July and the other stages through that, but also the post-implementation review. Of course, a new committee to be set up as a matter for the House. I have no objections to the House setting up committees to look at these big and important issues that we all care about, if that is what the House decides to do. Can I just also turn to my honourable friend, the member for Worcester, on the issue of Parliament and engagement. He did ask whether or not the Department would engage with his group of academics looking at technical safety standards for the social media, including what role they can play in this provision. I welcome the invite, and I'm sure my honourable friend, the member, the Minister responsible for this area, would be delighted to participate in those. So Mr Narayan will be in touch, I'm sure, to take him up on that particular offer. We've heard about algorithms. I think it's just worth concentrating on that. My honourable friend, the member for the Isle of Wight West, talked about the algorithms that serve harmful content. The government has been clear that algorithms can impact on the risk of harm for children, which is why the legislation comprehensively covers this. The legislation requires providers to consider via risk assessment how algorithms could impact children's exposure to illegal or harmful content, and providers must then take steps to mitigate these risks. Ofcom have powers if they do not do so. Happy to, yeah.
I do feel that there needs to be a tie-in here with the Cabinet Office and the review of electoral law. If a kind donor in my constituency was to own a big billboard and give me absolute free use of that during the election period, but offer to any other party that they could put a post-it note on the back of it that nobody would see, I would be expected to declare that as a gift in kind, a donation in kind. That isn't the case of algorithms that are posting and promoting generally right and far-right content during the regulated period. Surely there's got to be a better join-up here of election law and the online law as well.
Minister.
It's a huge issue, Sir John, and we'll all in this House be very concerned about mis and disinformation, about the impact on our democracy. And indeed, I'm sure in the period in which I have stood up to the period in which I sit down, my own social media will be full of bots and all sorts of other things that are trying to encourage people to say and get involved in that debate to influence the algorithm. And indeed, that can fundamentally disturb our democracy. And it's something that's very close to what we're looking at. And indeed, the Cabinet Office and ourselves are looking at that mis and disinformation issue, including the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, in terms of the media outlook and in terms of the way elections are run in this country, and something we should all be very, very clear that we will not have our democratic processes undermined by those kinds of algorithmic platforms that are serving up the kind of content that's providing mis and disinformation to the public.
So I appreciate that the Minister is saying that there is these powers in legislation, yet the process is still for the social media platforms to mark their own homework on this, and we're in a vicious circle where Ofcom won't take action unless they have a complaint based on evidence, but the evidence is not achievable because the algorithm is not made available for that scrutiny. How do you think Ofcom should be using those powers more clearly ahead of the elections to make sure that this kind of abuse to our democracy is not occurring?
Yeah, and there's a whole host of legislation, of course, that sits behind this, including from the Electoral Commission and the Online Safety Act. But it's really important for us to find ways to ensure that we're protecting our democratic processes, and indeed, whether it be from algorithmic serving of content or indeed foreign state actors. It will not be, it's in the public domain that when the Iranian servers went dark, when there were the conflict with the US, a third of pro-independence Facebook pages in Scotland went dark because it was being served by foreign state actors. We've seen that from Russia and various other foreign actors as well. So we have to be very clear that the regulations in place need to be implemented, and if they are not, we need to be finding other ways of making sure we protect our democracy. And if I can maybe just say a small tangent, that our public sector broadcasters and our public sector media companies are a key part of that in terms of what we are currently looking at. Can I just stay with my honourable friend, the member from Milton Keynes Central, who I thought gave an excellent contribution in terms of giving the figures of what's happening. But she did ask about end-to-end encryption. We support responsible use of encryption. Of course, it's a vital part of our digital world, but the Online Safety Act does not ban any service design such as end-to-end encryption, nor does it require the creation of backdoors. However, the implementation of end-to-end encryption in a way which intentionally binds tech companies to content will have a disastrous impact on public safety, particularly for children. We expect services to think carefully about their design choices and make the services safe by design for children. And that leads me to online gaming platforms like Roblox that she mentioned. Ofcom has asked the main platforms, including Roblox, to share what they are doing and make improvements where needed, and Ofcom will take action if that is not indeed brought forward. So there's a whole host of things that are happening, and we need the Online Safety Act and the regulations that are underpinning the Act to take time to feed through, and I hope that we can start seeing significant improvements, as has been reflected by an honourable friend from Sunderland Central. She also mentioned, if I can just touch on deep fakes, I think it's a really important thing in terms of our democracy as well. The government is concerned about the proliferation of AI-enabled products and services that enable deep fake, non-consensual images. In addition to criminalising the creation of non-consensual images, government is looking at further options, and we hope to provide an update for that shortly. It's key to protecting our wider public online, but also fundamentally protecting those that seek public office. So, John, if I could just, my final remarks, just say, make a few comments that the government agrees that a safer digital future needs to include small, personally owned and maintained websites. We recognise the importance that proportionate implementation of the Online Safety Act plays in supporting this aim. We can all agree that we need to protect children online and that we not want low-risk services to have any unnecessary compliance burden. That's a balance that we have to strike to make it proportionate. And the Government will be conducting a post-implementation review of the Act and will consider the burdens on low-risk services as part of this review, as mentioned in the petition, but also will make sure that the Online Safety Act protects children, is nimble enough to deal with a very fast-moving tech world. And I thank all honourable members for providing, in a very constructive debate, the issues that they have raised, and I look forward to engaging further in the months and years ahead.
Thank you, Minister. Now I call upon Lewis Atkinson to sum up.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to have you in the chair for the conclusion of this debate. Can I thank all members for their contributions? I think this was a really constructive and thorough debate that we've had today, where I have to say I've certainly learned a lot during the course of it. I only wish I'd heard some of your statements before I wrote my opening speech. Can I particularly thank the Minister for being so generous with his time and his thorough response and taking interventions, which I think has generated significant insight today, and also the contributions of the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, thoughtfully done, and the Shadow Minister, who I thought clearly brought her expertise on this subject. I particularly thought that the points around the wider impacts on mental health and well-being of the new online world are something that particularly relevant, actually, as the government thinks more widely about its approach, for example, to mental health in its strategy, which I hope will be forthcoming. As the Minister said, my only regret is that the few members of the House who have publicly called for the outright repeal of the Online Safety Act were not present here this afternoon to give their perspective and to engage with the thoroughness that I think all members here present have. My final couple of reflections, Sir John, are that I think everyone that I've heard in this space, in this debate, has been motivated by a desire to preserve rights and our British values, whether it be rights to freedom of speech, expression, and indeed the freedom of association, including those online, such as those through the small online spaces and forums. But as the Honourable Member for Worcester rightly said in his excellent contribution, though, safe spaces online open up space for further freedoms, and the freedoms of children cannot be infringed by freedoms for adults. And I think it was really shocking hearing the extent of the harms that children are suffering under the current environment. I think the motivations behind this petition were nothing about that at all, but it was very much about making sure that those freedoms of association that we hold dearly in this country are able to be continued online through small forums. And the Minister, I welcome his assurance that the government sees ample space for small and independent providers in the future as part of that. A reflection I had over the course of the debate is I think increasingly we're talking about safety by design. And actually, I think a lot of these online forums came about in a world where there was no safety by design. And actually part of the implementation issue is that the tech that has been used for online forums is probably 10 or 15 years old in terms of message boards. And if a new message board was being set up today using new tech standards, I would hope that safety by design would be much more embedded, and therefore the responsibilities that fall to individual volunteers and administrators would be lessened as a result. I think it's entirely natural that the first attempt at regulation and legislation will not ever get everything right and will require evolution. The Online Safety Act was a landmark moment at attempting to regulate online harms. And I think it's fair to say that the consensus that we've heard today is that that needs to evolve, that we shouldn't be looking to repeal, but to evolve at pace and ensure implementation at pace to ensure that we tackle those online harms in a way that is consistent with our British values and those freedoms of expression and association that we've heard about. So it only remains, Sir John, for me to thank again Mr Bainham, the creator of the petition, and the petitioners for their online engagement, I have to say, in the petition process, without which this really informative debate would not have occurred today. Thank you. I beg to move.
Thank you. So the question is that this House has considered e-petition 722903 relating to the Online Safety Act. As many of that opinions say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting now stands adjourned. Well done, Minister. Excellent. Very good. Very good. Oh, ban everything. I sent a note to Julia before she got up.
Forget the facts. Forget logic. Forget everything that seems real. Systems falling. We are the noise. Initiating Guardian Protocol. Arming Shiva Spear. Targeting Imperial gunship. Thank you.